this webinar, the content is actually based on the SAP Lumira Data Visualization Handbook that our team here have created. So here's the agenda for today's webinar. So first, I would like to start with an introduction on how you all can tell compelling data stories by knowing your purpose, knowing the data, and then crafting your message using data visualization. Then I will do a brief overview of what SAP Lumira is. So hopefully you all have some knowledge of the product and have already started using it. And after that, I'll be handing it off to Flavia, and she will go over in details the data visualization best practices and the different Lumira chart types. After that, we will go over the resources that can help you get started on becoming a data storyteller yourself, and also take a quick look of what the SAP Data Genius Challenge is and how you can use the power of data and make the world a better place. We will then end things off with some time for Q&A. Now, everyone possesses the power to tell compelling data stories, and you are the mastermind behind all of that. And this can be done by start finding out what your purpose is and drilling through your data, and then eventually crafting your message. So the first important thing to focus on is your audience. So start with finding the context of your audience, who they are, and what their expectations are. Then identify the message you want to deliver and lay a solid foundation for your story. So for example, if you're working with a sales dashboard, so your audience will be sales managers or district/global managers who will be interested in performance. So they would expect to see not just the overall performance, but also how well different regions perform and which products are better perceived by your customers. So the focus here should be sales KPIs such as revenue, profit losses, number of items sold, and all of that sorted by different regions, time, and our product category. And here, so the purpose would be for your audience to explore and be able to drill up and down the details and find the insights that they need. And now you need to work on the data part. So it is important to know the condition your data is in before starting to visualize and create that message. So back to the example on building the sales dashboard, you really need to take a look at how the data is structured, and it needs to be modeled appropriately in order to address the purpose that we have covered in the previous section and also answer your business questions correctly. And data types can be used to model certain characteristics of your data, and SAP Lumira supports the following: measures, dimensions, and hierarchies. And measures are numerical data that are calculated upon or aggregated. So examples are sum of revenue, average cost, or any non-numerical data that can be counted. And dimensions are categorical data. They constitute items such as year, country, product, or salary. And dimensions can also be organized as hierarchies. And SAP Lumira supports geographical hierarchies, custom hierarchies, and also time hierarchies. So now that you have explored your data and established who your audience is, you should have a better sense of what you want to tell your audience. So it is time to craft your message and story and see which visualization best articulates the information you are conveying. So you already know the goal and purpose of your message. You can now think about the story you want to tell with your data and what insights you want to bring to light. So Lumira, just again, very quick, is a self-service data visualization tool. So you can take data from any sources and connectivity such as Excel, HANA, or Hadoop, and manipulate, merge, or structure that data and quickly get the insights by building beautiful charts and visualizations using a drag-and-drop interface. And you're also able to bring in advanced mapping integration with S3 and create your own custom D3 extensions to fit your unique needs and find exactly what you're looking for. So why is data visualization important, and why are we talking about this here today? So research has shown that almost 50% of your brain is involved in visual processing, and just by adding illustrations to plain text, it increases people's ability to understand information better by 323%. And at the bottom here, we have a chart created by Stephen Few. And here he is trying to illustrate that certain people perceive certain variables, such as position, length, angle, more accurately than other variables. such as saturations and hue. So it is not just about realizing the importance of data visualization, but also know which chart type works best in different situations and cases, depending on the message you are conveying to your audience. Now, I will hand it off to Flavia, and she will talk about the data visualization best practices and the various SAP Lumira chart types.
Great. Thanks, Jane. That was a great introduction into a very important topic, best visualization practices. And we have all created charts and dashboards, infographics in the past. And so today's focus of the webinar is really to identify what is the best chart type based on your intention that can help you to convey your message most accurately and provide the most insight to your audience. So the way the next section is organized is really based on the intent, by what you want to achieve. So let's just start with the first topic, change over time. So change over time, if the intent is to show and share with your audience how your data changed over time, the line and the area chart are very good chart types to convey the message. So a line chart displays a measure over time, as we can see here. Here we can see the sales revenue and how it changed between 2012 and 14. It's also used to identify temporal pattern correlations between different time series, as well as to show period over period. And I'm just going to jump into a Lumira demo now. So here what we see is the same data that I just had on my slide, and I show you how you can enhance this data by adding additional features as well as using additional Lumira capabilities. So first of all, what I would like to highlight is that I modeled the quarter here as part of a time hierarchy. Here we can see the time hierarchy, and if you want to create such a time hierarchy in your data, what you can do is you just go to your date field and click on the create date time hierarchy. This allows you to actually drill down and up this hierarchy. So for example, we can change now the granularity from quarter to year just with a single click. Next, another interesting feature that we would like to highlight and that people often use when it comes to time series data is to smooth out the data. We see that we have quite some dips and here, so one option could be to add here a calculation, for example, a moving average. And what I'm doing here is I'm considering one value before and after, and the calculation that we see now is a moving average that really smoothes out the underlying data. We also have a forecasting feature. What the forecasting feature does, it allows you to create a forecast for the next few quarters in this case. Here, this forecasting feature is powered by our product SAP Predictive Analytics, and it allows you to create a time series forecast, as well as we can also show a linear regression. So if you want to know what is the overall trend in your data, one option is to use the linear regression feature and then just see that the overall trend for this data set is actually going up. And that can help to convey a message to your decision makers. So let's say instead of just having this one time series, we know that we actually have different product lines that contribute to the sales data. And this data is really the data set that Jane was talking about in the introduction, where the sales analyst wants to create a dashboard for his or her audience. And so let's say they want now to emphasize on what is the contribution of the different lines. And here we have two options. We can either include the lines here on the color shelf, and then we can see the breakdown, and we can see, for example, that accessories really contribute to this peak here in the first quarter of 2013. So here we see multiple lines. Alternatively, we can also display this is an area chart, which allows us to keep the overall value of our sales nicely shown in the charts. And these are just some suggestions that can be used when your intent is to share with your audience the change over time in your data. An additional chart type that can be very handy to do that is the column line chart. The column line chart really allows you to combine two different measures in a chart, such as in the example here, where we show the customer, the number of returning customers in correlation to the number of sold items and how they're correlating and what are the areas where they're not correlating as much. So these were just a couple of examples where chart types can help to visualize change over time. Let's move on now to comparison. So bar charts or column charts are probably the chart type that's most commonly used these days. And they are a great chart type to compare different categorical values. So here we see, for example, a stacked bar chart. A stacked bar chart is a great way to show what is the overall contribution of different categories to the overall value. As well as here, what we see is how to bring in hierarchies into the chart type, or just showing different categorical values. And some ideas to improve the message of your chart type is to add data labels, as we can see here. Also to customize, to create customized hierarchies that help then the user to see all these bars, all these categories belong to the yoga categories, and then the one on top belong to the CrossFit category. And then including color to emphasize on certain aspects or certain categories. So for example, if your category, if you want to emphasize on the equipment category, that would be then an option to really highlight this category, this bar, in a different color. So now let's say you want to emphasize on the difference between two different categories or two different values within a category. In this case, the trellis layout, which is also known as small multiples, is a great chart type that allows to emphasize the contribution and the values between two or more categorical values. So in this example on the right side, here, what we see is in the top chart, we see the number of milk containers sold, the number of organic milk containers sold, and in the bottom we see the number of regular milk containers sold, and what is their contribution in terms of revenue to our company. And so we can easily see that for both the organic as well as the regular milk, glass container bring in most of the revenue. So trellis charts are a great way to compare charts for different categorical values, and they are available in Lumira for most chart types. Okay, next one is ranking. So I like to use the ranking features when I really want to emphasize on the top or the bottom values in a chart or in a visualization. So in this case, on the right-hand side, what we did, we sorted the values based on the number of participants from different countries. And it really allows us to immediately see where are most of the participants coming from, as well as ranking is a great way to reduce the number of bars that are included in a chart. So if we have a chart that has, let's say, 100 bars, and we really want to emphasize only on the top 10 bars, then one option is to group the remainder of the bars into another category, or alternatively just use the top N feature that Lumira provides to you. So again, the ranking feature is a great way to reduce the number of data points in a chart, and therefore also the number of data points that your audience has to digest. And therefore it allows you to really focus on the aspect on your data that's most important for you to share with your audience. So next topic is partition to whole. So partition or part to whole is a concept that allows to show how measure values that make up the whole of something compare to one another and how they compare to the whole. So on the right hand side we see, for example, we see for the category sweatshirts, how much did each individual year contribute in terms of percentage to the overall numbers of values sold for each product line. So in this case, we see that the sweatshirts contribute, had a higher percentage in 2014 than, for example, the accessories. So the part to whole, the intent of part to whole is really to show what is the fraction of each category that contributes to the whole. And there are several chart types that can be used. So for example, a 100% stacked bar, what we see on the right side. Then a Marimekko chart that's also supported by Lumira. In addition, we can also have pie charts, ring charts, funnel charts, and other charts that can help to share with your audience what is the part to whole relationship in your data. And data visualization best practice wouldn't be complete without the pie charts, although I'm very, very hesitant to actually ever use the pie chart. My experience, and I've been in the area of data analysis and data mining for 15 years, is that in almost all cases, there's an alternative chart type that can convey your message much better than a pie chart. What are the reasons for that? A pie chart can be used, but in most cases actually abused, to show what is the contribution of different categories to the whole. So what we see here in this chart on the right, we see how these different categories, plastic, cotton, and glass, contribute to the overall value. And for me, the main message of this chart here on the right-hand side is really that they all contribute around a third. So we already see that visually, for me, it's impossible to know what is the exact difference between the blue and the yellow category without adding the labels to the pie chart. So the pie chart is really just there to show sort of what is the rough distribution of values, and then in order to know the exact values, we can add the labels. But again, in this case, had we used a bar chart, it would have been able to convey the message much better. Couple of suggestions. Limit the use to no more than 7 slices. And I always say a pie chart like that would make my mom very proud, but it has absolutely no informational value. So whenever I see a pie chart like this, it makes me feel very sad because it really doesn't convey any messaging. So my recommendation is really limit the use of pie charts to a small number of categories. And if you have this many categorical values, one option is to say, okay, let me just focus on these 2 categories, that maybe the first and the second category, and then group all other categories into one value. That would then reduce the number of values already to 3 partitions. So it would be much easier digestible for your audience, and also maybe less visually appealing, because I do agree that the rainbow looks quite nice, or not quite a rainbow, but the colors look quite nice. But it really helps to convey the message much better. So going back now to the presentation, limit the use to a small number of slices, whether it's now 5 or 8, 6 or 8, it doesn't matter, but it really is small numbers that can be digested by your audience. As I already mentioned before, if you are using data labels can really help your audience to better differentiate the exact values in a pie chart. Highlighting the most important slides, that's a feature that we have available in Lumira and that I often like to use when including pie charts in my infographics. That's really a good way to, again, helping your audience to digest that information. As I mentioned before, there's almost always an alternative chart type, for example, a bar chart that will help to convey the message much better. So a histogram is a type of column chart that really shows the distribution of measure values. And histograms are often used when we are dealing with numerical values, such as sales revenue or salary or age. And when we want to show these values on the x-axis, it doesn't make a lot of sense to show each individual value. Instead, what can help is to bin the data. And what binning is, it really means to group data into logical intervals. So for example, in the case of age group, here what would make sense is to create these 10-year bands. So everyone that's between 11 and 20 years old falls in the first group. Everyone that's between 21 and 30 years old falls in the second group, and so on. So once these groups have been generated, then it's much easier to actually see the distribution of a measure over these different age groups, or salary ranges, or revenue bands, you name it. So histogram is a chart type that I often use when I first start exploring the data, just to get an intuition about how does my data distribution look like. Do I have any outliers in the data? Are there certain categories that have very few or a lot of values? And what does this tell me about my business question? So let's quickly go over what's on the slide here. I already talked about the distribution of measure values and the outliers. And the suggestion is really to create the bins or ranges for these ranges, and then use a bar chart or a stacked bar chart to look at the distribution of your measure value. And another alternative to look at the distribution is the box plot. And I do want to spend a little bit more time on the box plot, as the box plot may not be familiar to some of you. And again, let me go back to my Lumira. And let's look at the example again that Jane mentioned at the beginning. So we have the sales manager, and he wants to understand what is the sales distribution, the revenue distribution across different product lines. So what I have here, I have 5 different product lines: accessories, dresses, and so on. So the first box plot here corresponds to accessories, second to dresses, and so on. So what is a box plot? A box plot is a visual way to show a distribution in a very condensed format. So there are a couple of things to know about a box plot. This line here at the bottom is actually the minimum value. So we know that there's no manager that makes less than, that's probably around 100,000, or it's actually around 50,000. There's no manager that makes less than 50,000 in sales revenue. So that's the bottom line. Then the top line here is typically, not typically, the top line here is the maximum. There's just one exception to that rule. So this line is the maximum. However, if there are data points that really a lot outside of this range, then we call them outliers. And these outliers are denoted by these circles here. And so what we can see in this case that we have 3 different outliers for the category accessories. Okay, so we covered now the minimum and the maximum as well as the outliers. And then the box. The box really tells me that 50% of my data is within this box. That means 50% of my managers bring in sales revenue that's between the lower and the upper value of the box. So in this case, it's between, let's say, around $500,000 to, let's say, 1.8 million. So the revenue, the sales revenue of these of 50% of my manager is between these 2 values. And then the additional really important value or information that we can derive from this box plot is based on the black line that we see here in the middle. And the black line is called the median. And the median really shows the value such that 50% of the values are below that. So 50% of the managers make less revenue than that. And 50% of the managers make more revenue. So it's a good way to gauge and also to compare different categories. So when I look at the chart here, what I can immediately tell that the median for 4 categories is around the same, value. Let's see what is it here, around 150,000. Whereas for the t-shirts, it's actually much higher. So the box plot is a great way to explore the distributions in your data, in particular the distributions across different categorical values. In this case, the distribution across different lines, different product lines in your business. So let's move on to the heat map and the tree map. And a heat map is a good chart type, again, to show the distribution of two measures, 1 or 2 measures, depending whether you want to use the heat map or the tree map. And it allows to differentiate the different categorical values by the size of the tiles, as well as the shading. So here we have a scale that displays the different quota attainments, and we can see that different managers have a different quota attainment and fall into different categories. So the heat and tree map are really great ways, especially if the number of categories is smaller, to show them visually, and we see immediately that these 2 managers contribute the most to the measure that we want to emphasize on. Correlation. So correlation is another important topic that often comes up when we look at different business problems. And one of the chart types that I often use, and that's in the industry often used for correlation, is the scatter plot. So the scatter plot is really used to show or to examine whether there is a correlation between 2 different measures. So for example, here we have on the y-axis, we have the household income. And then on the x-axis, we have the population change in percentage in the last 10 years. And we can see that there's sort of a general trend, but there's a lot of, but it's not a very clear trend. So we have a lot of, actually, we have a lot of noise around it. So we can actually tell that there's not a clear correlation between these 2 different measures. If you're looking not just at two, but if you look at multiple combinations, then we also support the scatter matrix that allows to show several scatter plots in a trellis layout to allow easily to compare the different scatter plots in one single visualization. In addition to that, there's also the bubble chart. The bubble chart is used if we want to introduce a third measure. So the third measure is then visually represented by the size of the bubble. So instead of each circle here having the same size in a bubble chart, each of the bubbles has different sizes based on a different measure. I personally hardly ever use the bubble chart because I feel there's often a lot of overplotting going on in bubble charts, so I typically try to stay away from bubble charts if I can. Okay, next topic is the table. Of course, Lumira also supports the table. And let me jump again back to Lumira just to give a couple of examples. So here in this table, I'm showing all my sales managers and the revenue they brought in. And now I want to emphasize, so that's great that we see that, but what we want to emphasize now is on sales managers that are overperforming. So let me create a rule. So this is now conditional formatting. This is our conditional formatting feature. And we can easily, visually, in a couple of clicks, create a very simple rule. So we call it overperforming based on sales revenue. And we say they're performing well if the sales revenue is above, let's say, 160 or 1.6 million. And let's fill it then with a green color. Okay, excellent. So now in a couple of clicks, we have been able to identify the sales managers that are overperforming. And I like to use conditional formatting if I have a fairly big table and I want to really emphasize on certain cells that are important for me and for my audience. And so you can actually create as many rows as you want, and you can manage your rows and so on. Great. And a couple of other things I want to emphasize. Of course, you can also then set the precision and really work with how much information you do want to share with your audience, how much details you want to share. On the topic of geographical information, one of the chart types that often used is the so-called choroplast map. So a choroplast map uses differences in shading and coloring to really emphasize on different regions. So in this map here, what we see is for each state, we have a different color based on the unemployment rate. And so the choroplast map is actually a great visualization type if the geographical regions don't have too many different sizes. So it clearly emphasizes on states that are bigger and de-emphasizes on states that are smaller. So I would always use a little bit of caution when using the choroplast map just to make sure that we don't underemphasize on geographical regions that are much smaller. And if you do have that scenario, an alternative chart type is then the geo-bubble chart. The geo-bubble chart will create one bubble per geographical region, but it has, of course, the drawback that it can do some overplotting. So it really is then based on the data. You need to make a judgment call. Does it make more sense to use a choroplast map or to use a geo-bubble chart, or maybe use a combination of a one of these chart types with a table or bar chart that then allows to show the information in a complementary way. So let's move on now to Esri. So Esri is a international software company that focuses on geographical information, and SAP has a partnership with Esri for their mapping service. So basically what you need to do is then you just go here to the GeoMap feature, and what it does, it loads the Esri maps in the background. And so now you say, oh, that's great that you have all these chart types. And by the way, we also have combined stacked column and line charts, numeric points, radar charts, tag clouds, waterfall charts, tree charts, parallel coordinate charts, network charts, and other chart types. But there's this one chart type that you're really missing and that you absolutely need to include for your audience. No problem. That's why we have chart extensions. As Jane mentioned at the beginning, our chart extensions really allow you to create custom charts and then include them in Lumira, share them with your audience, share them with your colleagues, and just create a chart that really conveys the message that you want to share with your audience. Just sort of on one page, what are some of the chart types that can help you with the various goals that you have in mind?
Great. Thank you, Flavia. That was very insightful and lots of great information. So here are some of the resources that we'll provide listed here. So as I mentioned in the beginning, this webinar is based on the data visualization best practices document. And here below is the link where you can download the document and look at it for yourself in more details and share with others. And of course, if you visit saplumira.com, you are able to download the personal edition of SAP Lumira for free and start exploring and with your data sets. And if you want to stay more up to date with current SAP Lumira news, please follow us on Twitter, and the Twitter handle is @SAPAnalytics. So this concludes our presentation, and we will now open up to Q&A.
Question from Prakriti. This was in conjunction with your correlation slide, the scatter plot. How do you distill noise from data?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think when it comes to noise, for me the question is always, what is noise? Is noise something that is accidentally got into data, for example, through some mistakes, like people typed in the wrong number, or is that noise, does that noise actually have a meaning? So for example, if we have an outlier in a scatter plot, is that actually a data point that I should investigate? Maybe it is a really high performing manager and I want to find out, or why is he doing so well, or why is he not doing so well, if it's like an outlier on the other side of the spectrum. So I think in general, talking about noise is always very difficult, because the first thing that I normally do when I see so-called outliers is really to identify, is that a data error, is that an error in adding up the numbers, data entry error, or is it actually something I need to pay attention to because it gives me more insight into my data. Doesn't mean that I need to include it in my visualization, but outliers often give us very good insight into our data.
Question from Mohammed. Are there plans for Lumira to adopt the IBCS visualization standards that SAP have started to use?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the IBCS business standard is a standard that was developed in order to help standardize basically some of the visualization practices, specifically for business users in the financial domain. And in terms of Lumira, I'm not aware of any plans. But this being said, that there are two parts to the standard. One part of the standard are just some rules that you can already do today in Lumira, in terms of, for example, picking the right color, writing concise titles, and so on. So if you go through the standards, there are a lot of roles that can already be done manually today in Lumira, and some other roles require different chart types, and some of these chart types, they will be made available, some or all, I don't know right now, will be made available to you in our new cloud product, Cloud for Analytics.
There was a question from Peter on the box plot example that you showed, Flavia. What do the outliers represent? Higher than maximum values? Question mark.
Mm-hmm. Excellent question. So if I go back to my box plot, there are some industry standards how these how these outliers are defined. Instead of me going now into some formulas, what I really would suggest, if you just briefly Google it, it will give you the formula. It basically talks about the difference. If it has a certain distance away from the median, then something is considered an outlier. So this is an industry standard. It's not something that we made up, or every tool comes up with their own rule, but it's based on what they call interquartile range. And again, we wouldn't have time to go into details right now, but I encourage you just to spend 10-15 minutes looking for it on the internet, and you will see the exact formula that's used in order to define the so-called outliers.